Welcome to the deep dive. If you're looking for a shortcut to being well informed, you are absolutely in the right place.
Today we are diving into diuretic agents.
Right. The drugs that everyone just called water pills.
Exactly. And, as any clinician knows, that is a profound understatement of what they actually do.
So that's our mission today then, to get past that oversimplification.
hmm We're going to break down the precise clinical significance and the very different mechanisms of the five main classes of diuretics.
Okay, so let's frame this. When we talk about diuretics, we're not just talking about, making people urinate more. What's the fundamental thing they have to do?
The non-negotiable action really is that they increase sodium excretion. It's a process called natriuresis.
The three reasons.
Yep. And they do this by directly interfering with the kidney's ability to pull sodium ions back out of the filtrate.
And that's where the basic physiology lesson kicks in, right?
Right.
Water always follows sodium.
Always. It has to maintain osmotic balance. So when the drug makes you lose sodium, you predictably lose water right along with it.
So it's a domino effect.
Exactly. A physiological domino effect. And when that water leaves the bloodstream, your total intravascular volume goes down, which in turn reduces the hydrostatic pressure inside your blood vessels.
And that reduced pressure, that's the key. That one mechanism lets these drugs treat all these wildly different conditions.
Precisely. I mean, they're essential for managing edema. That's fluid buildup from things like heart failure, cirrhosis, kidney disease. They're also crucial for hypertension.
And even glaucoma, which seems completely unrelated.
Right, because they can decrease intraocular pressure, the pressure inside the eye. It's all about manipulating the body's fluid and pressure systems.
Okay, before we get into the specific drugs, let's nail down a few key terms. First, edema. What are we actually seeing?
Edema is visible fluid that's moved into the interstitial spaces, so the tissue outside the blood vessels. It happens when that balance between osmotic pull and hydrostatic push gets thrown off.
And we're trying to decrease that push.
We are. And in doing that, we have to watch out for the biggest adverse effect.
Which is?
Hypokalemia, low potassium. It's the most common problem we see, and it's serious. We're talking muscle weakness, cramps, and critically, cardiac arrhythmias.
Okay. And the last term? High-ceiling diuretics.
Ah, yeah. That's just a nickname for the most powerful class. They get that name because they cause a huge amount of diuresis by acting in the loop of Henle.
Got it. Let's jump in there.
Let's start with the first-line agents, though.
Right. The thiazides, this is the group we see the most, like hydrochlorothiazide. Millions of people are on it. Why is this the go-to for something like essential hypertension?
Well, because they're the mild agents. Their mechanism of action is to block the chloride pump.
The chloride pump.
Yep, it's in the ascending limb of the loop of Henle and the distal tubule. And when you block that pump, you keep both chloride and sodium in the tubule, ready to be excreted.
But hold on, if it's blocking a pump, why is it considered mild?
That's the crucial detail. It's all about location, location, location. They work further downstream in parts of the tubule that are pretty impermeable to water.
Ah, so you lose the salt, but not a ton of water follows it.
You've got it. It produces what we call a saluretic effect, so very sodium-rich urine, but it doesn't move a huge volume of water, perfect for chronic blood pressure management.
Okay, now the downsides, the side effects. It's not just about losing potassium, is it?
No, absolutely not. Beyond the risk of hypokalemia, thiazides can cause a serious metabolic issue. They decrease uric acid excretion.
Why does that happen? It sounds like they're competing for something.
They are. The uric acid and the diuretic are literally competing for the same secretion sites in the tubule. If the diuretic wins, uric acid builds up in the blood.
Which can trigger gout.
Or make existing gout much worse. It's a key thing to watch for.
What about patients with diabetes?
Another big one. Long-term use can actually increase blood glucose levels. This seems to be partly related to the hypokalemia they cause, which can mess with insulin release.
So if you have a patient with high blood pressure, but they also have gout and maybe borderline diabetes,
then the standard first-choice drug suddenly requires a lot more caution, a lot more monitoring of their labs, potassium, uric acid, and glucose.
it's never just about the drug, it's about the whole patient.
Always. And of course, they're contraindicated if you have an allergy to thiazides or sulfonamides, or if you have severe renal disease, they just won't work.
Okay, let's pivot to the other end of the spectrum. The heavy hitters.
The loop diuretics.
Furosemide Lasix. This is the one everyone knows. Why are they called high ceiling? Show us the power.
The power, again, is all about location. They block the chloride pump in the ascending loop of Henle, and that segment,
Ah,
Well, it's the body's master control for sodium.
master control.
It's responsible for reabsorbing about 30% of all the sodium that gets filtered by your kidneys.
30%, so if you block that.
You get a massive, and I mean massive, and rapid loss of sodium in water. This is what we use for emergencies, like acute pulmonary edema in the ICU.
How much fluid are we talking?
We've seen fluid loss of up to 20 pounds in a single day in acute settings.
Wow. Okay, that is a shocking amount. And with that kind of intensity, the safety alerts have to be just as intense.
They are. The risk of hypokalemia and hypocalcemia is much higher. But the unique and maybe most severe risk with this class is ototoxicity.
Ototoxicity, you mean hearing damage?
Yes, hearing loss, even deafness has been reported. It's usually with rapid IV administration or really high doses. It's often reversible, but it's a critical thing to educate patients about.
And there's a safety alert about a medication error here, too.
A huge one. The name confusion between furosemide and torsemide. They sound similar, but their dosage and strength are very different. Mixing them up can be fatal.
Let's make this real. The book gives the example of MR, a 68-year-old with heart failure on furosemide and digoxin. She calls terrified, thinking she's having an allergic reaction.
Because she's urinating so much.
Right.
And that scenario is perfect because it shows that the first step is always education. MR has mistaken the drug's intended therapeutic effect for side effect.
You have to explain to her that, no, this is actually good. The drug is working. It's reducing the volume, taking the strain off her failing heart.
Exactly. And then you have to talk about the digoxin interaction.
Which is critical.
Paramount. Digoxin toxicity gets dramatically worse when potassium levels are low. So if the furosemide is causing hypokalemia, MR is at a huge risk for a life-threatening arrhythmia.
So you have to teach her the signs of low potassium and stress the need for regular lab work.
It's a constant balancing act.
Okay, let's move on from the volume managers to the more specialized agents, starting with the ones that manage that potassium balance.
The potassium-sparing diuretics. Think spironolactone.
So their whole purpose is to be gentle, but save the potassium.
Right. They're mild diuretics. Spironolactone works as an aldosterone antagonist. It blocks the action of the hormone aldosterone in the distal tubule.
And aldosterone is what usually swaps sodium for potassium.
Correct. So by blocking it, you excrete sodium in water, but you hang on to the potassium.
So they're often used with loop diuretics to kind of counteract that potassium loss. But the risk just flips, doesn't it?
It flips completely. The main concern here is hyperkalemia, too much potassium, which has its own signs. Confusion, muscle cramps, and again, dangerous arrhythmias.
And spironolactone has some other unique side effects.
It does. It looks a bit like certain sex hormones structurally, so it can cause androgen-like effects, things like hirsutism in women or gynecomastia in men.
Okay, from the heart, let's go to the eyes. Carbonic Anhydrase Inhibitors. Acetazolamide. How does blocking an enzyme cause diuresis?
It's a really interesting mechanism. The enzyme, carbonic anhydrase, is key for producing hydrogen ions. You slow that down and you end up losing sodium and bicarbonate in the urine.
So they're diuretics, but that's not really their main job, is it?
Correct. Their primary use is treating glaucoma. That same action also slows down the secretion of aqueous humor in the eye.
Which lowers the pressure inside the eye.
Exactly. But there's a trade-off.
Losing all that bicarbonate.
Leads to metabolic acidosis. Because bicarbonate is a major buffer in your blood. That's the key adverse effect to watch for.
Okay, last one. The one for true emergencies. Osmotic diuretics. Mannitol.
This one is dramatic. Mannitol is basically a sugar that you can only give IV. It acts like a powerful, non-selective vacuum cleaner.
A vacuum cleaner.
It exerts this massive osmotic pull. It literally pulls huge amounts of fluid out of extravascular spaces, especially from the brain and the eyes, and dumps it into the bloodstream to be forced out by the kidneys.
And the key thing is it does this without messing with sodium.
Precisely. That makes the drug of choice for acute crises, like lowering life-threatening intracranial pressure after a head injury or for an acute glaucoma attack before surgery.
But moving that much fluid that fast? That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is. The biggest risk is a sudden, rapid drop in fluid levels. That can lead straight to severe hypotension, cardiac decompensation, even shock. These patients need one-on-one monitoring in a critical care unit.
So across all these classes, there have to be some universal nursing priorities.
Absolutely. The assessment has to be meticulous. We're talking daily weights, strict intake and output monitoring, checking skin turgor, checking for edema.
And which labs are the ones you just cannot skip?
You're zeroing in on electrolytes. Potassium is number one, always, but also calcium with the loops, uric acid with the thiazides, glucose, and of course, liver and renal function tests. The drugs don't work if the kidneys don't work.
What about actually giving the medication?
Simple rules. Give oral forms early in the day. Nobody wants to be up all night urinating. And if you're giving any of these IV, especially loops or mannitol, you give it slowly. Pushing it too fast is what causes shock or that hearing loss we talked about.
Okay, let's talk about the single most important teaching point for any patient on any of these drugs. Fluid rebound. Why is this so dangerous and, honestly, so counterintuitive?
Because it's the body's protective reflex fighting back. If a patient gets worried about all the urination and they drastically cut back on their fluids.
Which seems like a logical thing to do.
It does. But the body interprets that smaller, more concentrated blood volume as a state of shock. So the brain releases ADH antidiuretic hormone to hold onto water, and the kidneys fire up the RAAS system to hold onto sodium.
So the body starts fighting the drug with everything it has, and the result is
Rebound edema, sometimes even worse than what you started with. It completely defeats the purpose of the medication.
So the teaching is critical. You have to tell them to maintain their usual fluid intake.
Yes. Don't go crazy, but drink your normal amount of fluids. And avoid excessive salt. That and the daily weight check is the key.
That's the objective measure.
It is. Same scale, same clothes, same time every day, and you tell them to report any big change immediately. A gain or loss of 3 pounds or more in one day or a 5-pound change in a week. That's a red flag.
What about kids and older adults?
You just have to be more careful. Children are at a much higher risk for rapid electrolyte shifts. Furosemide, for example, has a strict dose limit. No more than 6 milligrams per kilograms per day.
And for older adults?
For older adults, you just assume they might have some renal or hepatic impairment. You start low and you go slow. Lowest effective dose, and titrate up carefully based on their response.
So this deep dive really shows that diuretic therapy is so much more than just water loss. It's complex sodium management.
It is. So to recap, thiazides are your mild distal agents for hypertension. Loop diuretics are potent, work in the loop of Henle with that unique ototoxicity risk.
Potassium-sparing agents flip the risk to hyperkalemia. Carbonic Anhydrase Inhibitors are mainly for glaucoma, risking acidosis. And osmotic diuretics like mannitol are for acute pressure crises, using that massive osmotic pull.
It's all about controlling the body's internal pressure systems.
So here's a final thought for you to take away. Given how powerful the body's own backup systems are, like RAS and ADH, how critical is it for patients to understand the why behind drinking enough fluid, even when the goal is to lose fluid?
It's everything.
That knowledge about fluid rebound isn't just a teaching point. It's the key to preventing a clinical crisis.
Understanding the body's protective reflexes is just as important as understanding the drug's mechanism.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this knowledge empowers you to provide safer, more informed care.
Until next time, keep exploring.